So you want to know more about the 1031 exchange timeline. A 1031 exchange is a really powerful tool, both for property managers who want to give added flexibility and options to their clients, or investors looking to maximize their earning potential. But before you can take advantage of these 1031 exchanges, you need to understand how they work. And the most important aspect of the 1031 exchange process is the timeline that anyone wanting to do a 1031 exchange must adhere to. So first of all, what is a 1031 exchange? A 1031 or like-kind exchange is named after the IRS code section 1031. Like I said, it's a super useful tool that property managers or investors can use to defer capital gain tax, among some other useful benefits. I actually already made a video all about what exactly is the 1031 exchange and how it works, so if you want to check that out, I will leave a link to it down below, or you can click up here somewhere and it'll be up there. Basically, you use the 1031 tax code to exchange 2 or more properties. In the most common type, a deferred exchange, you start by selling a property. This is often offered to as the relinquished property as you're giving it up. Next, you're going to shortlist a few replacement candidates, then you choose one of those properties before the end of the 1031 exchange timeline. So here are the basic rules for performing a 1031 exchange on one of your or your client's properties. It must be a business or investment property. It must be like kind, or in other words, they need to be similar. By the way, most business or investment property is like kind. It must be the same taxpayer. The same group or individual that sells the first property must be one that purchases the replacement. It must be of equal or greater value. The property you're purchasing can't be a lower value compared to the relinquished one. And lastly, it must follow the 1031 exchange timeline, which is what I'm going to be breaking down in this video. So with that being said, let's break down that timeline. So the 1031 exchange timeline can be a little bit confusing, but it is pretty straightforward. The basic idea is this: you sell a property, the 180-day timeline begins, you hire a qualified intermediary to help you hold the sale funds until the purchase, and by day 45, you select a few properties as candidates for the new one that you're purchasing. And yes, you must purchase one of the ones you select if you want to avoid capital gains. By day 180, you purchase the new property and boom, exchange complete. Sounds pretty simple, right? Well, let's break down these specifics. Right now, I'm going to talk about what's usually referred to as the deferred or delayed exchange. That's because the purchase is delayed or separate from the sale. It's by far the most common one, but I'll break down the other ones as well, so just keep watching. So let's start with day 1, the sale of the soon-to-be relinquished property you're giving up or exchanging. We say day 1, but really the exchange process starts even before that. As soon as you start working with a realtor or broker and open a contract, it's time to hire a qualified intermediary. A qualified intermediary, or QI, will officially start the exchange period as soon as the relinquished property is sold. The qualified intermediary's job is to receive the sale proceedings to be held until the new property is ready for purchase, holds those funds while you identify replacement candidates, and release those funds to purchase the new exchange property. A few important points here. A qualified intermediary is required to validate the exchange. Without a QI, the exchange is invalid, and the exchange must be opened with your QI before the sale of the relinquished property closes. If you follow the process so far, you're ready for the next step. So day 45, you need to identify replacement property. The selection process is kind of a tricky part of the 1031 exchange. That's because there are several guidelines and rules you need to be aware of, and not just to make sure that there aren't any problems, but also to take full advantage of the exchange options available to you. So now that the relinquished property is sold and the funds are safely tucked away with your QI, the exchange process officially begins. First, you have 45 days from the start of the exchange to choose up to 3 candidates. These exchange candidates are properties you're considering to purchase as the exchange property. The deal is that by the end of the 180-day exchange window, you have to select one of those properties to purchase. If you select 3 exchange candidates and later choose to purchase a property that isn't one of those candidates, the exchange isn't valid and you'll be responsible for the capital gains tax. So no more tax break. So definitely choose your candidates carefully. There's really 2 methods for identifying your potential replacement properties. Simply complete the purchase of the replacement or exchange property before the identification period, 45 days, is up. Or you can deliver a written document with an identification notice signed by you or your investors as the exchanger and delivered to your qualified intermediary by midnight of the 45th day. By the end of the 45-day mark, you must have used one of those methods for the exchange to be or remain valid. So typically you'll choose 3 identification properties. However, there are a few methods you can use for selecting replacement properties. So let's talk about those now. Your first option is, like I said, 3 properties. You select 3 potential replacement properties without having to take into consideration their fair market value, and we'll talk about why that's important in just a second. The second option is called the 200% rule. You can identify more than 3 properties if the aggregate fair market value of the properties doesn't exceed 200% of the value of the relinquished property. And then the third option is called the 95% exception. This is the most confusing of the 3. So the gist of it is that when there are are more than 3 properties selected, it'll be treated as though no replacement property was selected. However, that doesn't apply to any replacement property selected before the end of the 45-day selection period, or properly identified replacement property received before the end of the exchange period if that property is worth at least 95% of the aggregate fair market value of the other identified replacement properties. I know that one's a little confusing, but that's just a quick breakdown. Keep in mind that this is really just one main rule, that first one we talked about, and then 2 exception rules. So with that out of the way, let's touch on the guidelines for identifying replacement property. So a proper identification notice needs to be crafted, and here's what needs to be included for each property: specific and ambiguous description of the replacement or exchange property, a signature from the exchanger, either a legal description, street address, or distinguishable name, such as Honda Center. If the property is to be produced in any way, such as with raw land, a detailed description must be included outlining the changes to be made. And now it's time to finish up the exchange. The rest of the 180-day exchange period is reserved for finishing up the purchase of the replacement property. It's important to repeat that the purchase must be completed by the end of the 100-day period if you want to be compliant with the 1031 exchange timeline. That includes federal holidays and weekends, exactly 180 days on the nose. After all, it is the IRS we're talking about. Provided you actually did close on the purchase of the replacement property, the exchange is completed successfully. Congrats! Okay, so you've completed the exchange, deferred capital gains, and potentially helped you or a client profit from shifting their portfolio. One last tip: make sure to notify your tax advisor as soon as the exchange is complete. The investor's annual taxes in the year the relinquished property was sold shouldn't be filed until the exchange is complete. In some cases, an extension might be the smart way to go depending on when you finish your exchange. Make sure to consult with your tax professional during the 1031 exchange process to make sure you're taking the right steps from the beginning to the end. Okay, so far we talked about the most popular type of exchange, a deferred or delayed exchange. However, there are 3 additional types of 1031 exchanges. There's a simultaneous exchange, reverse exchange, and construction exchange. Each of these are used way less than the deferred exchange, mostly because they don't offer the same hallmark benefits. But that being said, they do have their place depending on the situation. So let's go over those real quick. So first we have the simultaneous exchange. In this exchange, the property you're selling and the replacement property you're purchasing close on the exact same day. As you might expect, this is a little bit tricky to pull off. One small delay on either side can throw off the entire process. That does make it pretty inflexible compared to the other exchange methods, especially that most popular one, the deferred exchange. So another type is a reverse exchange. A reverse or forward exchange is the easiest to understand because it's virtually the same process, but reversed. So that means that first you purchase the new replacement property, then you sell the old one within 180 days. Until the old relinquished property is sold, it's parked and can't be touched. Once the property is sold, your proceedings are forwarded by your qualified intermediary through a trust or similar vehicle. And the last kind is a construction exchange. The last unique type of exchange, a construction exchange or improvement exchange, is used for the purpose of performing improvements using the equity from the sale of the relinquished property. A construction exchange also follows its own slightly modified version of the 1031 exchange timeline. So with a construction exchange, you still identify replacement property by day 45. What changes is that by day 180, all improvements must have been completed on the new replacement property before the title can be transferred. Also, the rules stipulate that you must receive substantially the same property as that which you identified by the 45th day of the exchange process. That last bit mostly refers to the fact that by the time you receive the property, it must be of the same or greater value as when you originally selected it as a potential replacement. So now that you have all of that information, what are the benefits to a 1031 exchange? Obviously, the primary benefit, like we've talked about, is the ability to defer capital gain taxes indefinitely. And that's enough reason in itself to consider a 1031 exchange a valuable tool for your clients, but there are a few more reasons that make it worth it. So with a 1031 exchange, you can exchange to protect yourself from market volatility, exchange one high-risk property or a set of properties for lower-risk ones. You can exchange to minimize upkeep, exchanging one high upkeep property or a set of properties for ones that are lower maintenance. And you can take advantage of a developing area by exchanging one property or set of properties in a low-growth market for properties in a developing area. So now that you're clear on how a 1031 exchange works and what the benefits are, it's time to consider whether it's right or not for you or your clients. So definitely consider these things. What needs to get done? What are your goals? What's the long-term strategy? And before doing a 1031 exchange, also consider factors such as liquidity needs, financial and lifestyle, objectives, property ownership, possible tax liability, market timing, and of course, debt. Only you know your needs, your wants, and your situation, so make sure to take the complete picture into consideration before acting. I can't tell you all this without mentioning 1031 exchange costs and risks. Generally, a 1031 exchange is only going to have one added cost attached to it, and that's the hiring of the qualified intermediary. Hiring the QI is required for a reverse exchange and virtually necessary for a smooth exchange of any other kind. In terms of risk, most exchange types, and most notably a deferred exchange, only come with one risk: paying capital gains. And that would be because you didn't complete the exchange within the timeline, or you broke one of the rules. So if you're expecting to avoid capital gains tax from the exchange, but then something happens during the deferred exchange process that delays the purchase past the 180-day marker, well, now you have to pay those taxes. With that being said, the 180-day period is usually pretty generous and typically more than enough time to complete everything with time to spare, including complications. So whether you're a property manager or investor, a 1031 exchange is a useful tool that makes a lot of things easier. It can be helpful to use a qualified intermediary and even consider seeking an exchange expert to help you through the process, whether you have a team or managing it on your own. You know, kind of like how DoorLoop's property management software helps managing your properties, including everything from accounting to managing service calls, simpler and easier. Anyways, however you go about it, I hope that this video helped illuminate the 1031 timeline so you know what to expect the next time you or one of your investors needs an exchange. And if it did, make sure to give this video a thumbs up. Also, a quick disclaimer: the materials and information available in this video are for informational purposes only and not for the purpose of providing tax or legal advice. You should contact your attorney and or accountant to obtain advice with respect to any particular issue, question, or problem. And if you want to learn more about how 1031 exchanges work, the 1031 exchange rules, type of exchanges, and everything else you might need to know, you can read our master guide. I will link it down below. All that being said, don't forget to subscribe for more real estate and property management tips and tricks. I'll see you in the next one. Bye!